Remember when riding in a car without a seatbelt was completely normal? The 70s and 80s were special decades, but a lot of what passed as parenting back then feels unimaginable now. In this video, we're taking a look at 20 parenting methods from those times that simply wouldn't fly today. Back in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't unusual to see toddlers walking down the high street, attached to reins like little pets. Parents saw them as a practical way to stop kids from running into roads or wandering off in crowds. The idea was rooted in safety, but today, many see it as restrictive or even embarrassing for a child. While harnesses still exist, their widespread use has declined as strollers, hand-holding, and modern child leashes designed with subtlety replaced them. Shifts in parenting philosophy also play a role. Emphasis now lies on teaching independence and awareness rather than physical restraint. What once symbolized careful parenting now sparks debate about overprotection and dignity. Classrooms in Britain during the 1970s often had an unmistakable presence, the cane or slipper waiting for misbehaving pupils. Corporal punishment wasn't just tolerated, it was standard in many schools, both state and private. Parents expected teachers to discipline children physically if they stepped out of line. By the late 1980s, increasing public pressure, research on child psychology, and changing social attitudes began to erode this practice. The UK gradually banned corporal punishment in state schools in 1987, with further restrictions following in private education. Today, the idea of a teacher striking a child feels unthinkable. Discipline has shifted toward restorative practices, counselling, and positive reinforcement, leaving canes firmly in the past. Homes of the past rarely featured child-proof locks or tamper-resistant packaging. Bleach under the sink, aspirin on the counter, and pesticides in the shed were all within easy reach of curious young hands. Parents didn't always view these items as major hazards, assuming children would simply know better. Unfortunately, this led to countless accidental poisonings and emergency hospital visits. Public health campaigns in the 1980s pushed for safer storage, and legislation eventually required child-resistant caps on medicines and warnings on chemical products. Today, it's expected that potentially dangerous substances are locked away or kept out of sight. Modern awareness and regulation have transformed household safety, highlighting how lax things once were. Children in the 1970s often roamed their neighbourhoods with little adult supervision, and chatting to strangers was seen as part of normal life. Neighbours might offer sweets, give a lift, or even invite kids in without alarm bells ringing. Parents trusted their communities more, believing the wider public would look out for children rather than harm them. However, high-profile cases in the 1980s changed attitudes dramatically. Campaigns warning about stranger danger reshaped how parents taught children to interact with unfamiliar adults. Now, kids are often told to avoid unsupervised conversations or situations with people they don't know. What was once interpreted as community friendliness is today overshadowed by safety concerns. Entertainment in the 70s and 80s looked very different. With fewer channels and no streaming services, children often watched whatever was on TV, whether or not it was age-appropriate. Late-night films, violent cartoons, or risque comedies sometimes slipped into young viewers' evenings without much notice. Video rentals in the 1980s added to the problem, with limited enforcement of age ratings. Parents often trusted kids to self-regulate, assuming exposure wouldn't cause harm. Today, parental controls, streaming filters, and strict content ratings ensure children are shielded from adult material. The contrast between unrestricted past viewing and today's careful monitoring underscores how much media consumption has changed in family life. For many parents in the past, letting their kids spend the night at a friend's house was a casual decision, often with little background checking. Children as young as 9 or 10 could pack a bag, stay over, and parents rarely worried about supervision. In rural areas, it wasn't unusual for groups of kids to camp out in fields or gardens with minimal oversight. Today, parents are far more cautious, vetting the host family, setting strict rules, and often delaying unsupervised stays until children are older. Increased awareness of safety, health, and well-being has reshaped this once casual ritual. What once seemed a simple childhood adventure now carries layers of precaution. Cough syrup in the 70s might not have come from a pharmacy at all. It came from Grandma's kitchen. Families often relied on folk cures passed down through generations, like honey with brandy for sore throats, butter on burns, or onion poultices for chest colds. These remedies reflected trust in tradition and a lack of easy access to regulated medicines. While some worked, others were ineffective or even harmful. Over time, medical research, packaging with clear instructions, and stricter pharmaceutical standards pushed folk cures aside. Today, parents are encouraged to seek professional medical advice instead of turning to untested home recipes. What once felt comforting and familiar is now often viewed with skepticism or caution. The toy box of a 1970s child could be a minefield. Many toys were made with lead-based paint, brittle plastics, or detachable pieces that posed choking hazards. From lawn darts with sharp metal tips to chemistry sets containing real chemicals, fun sometimes came with serious risk. Back then, regulation was minimal and recalls were rare. As accidents piled up, safety standards tightened in the UK and Europe, leading to CE certification and rigorous product testing. Today's toys are far safer, with non-toxic materials and strict size regulations for young children. While nostalgic collectors might remember them fondly, parents now would likely be horrified by what kids once played with daily. Children in Britain during the 70s often played role-playing games inspired by Western films, dressing up as cowboys and Indians. These games were seen as harmless fun, yet they reinforced crude and stereotypical portrayals of Native Americans. Feathers, toy tomahawks, and war paint were all part of the costume, with no thought given to cultural respect or accuracy. At the time, little awareness existed about the harm such stereotypes caused. Modern conversations around representation and inclusivity mean these games are now considered insensitive, even offensive. While imaginative play is still encouraged, parents today steer children toward more respectful and diverse role-play options, reflecting a much deeper cultural awareness than before. For kids in the 70s and 80s, sweets weren't just a treat, they were part of everyday life. Parents often bought bags of penny sweets, sugary cereals, and fizzy drinks without a second thought. There was little understanding of long-term risks like childhood obesity, diabetes, or dental decay. Advertising campaigns targeted children directly, making sugar an almost unavoidable part of daily diets. Today, with rising health awareness, parents are encouraged to limit sugar, read labels, and promote balanced nutrition. Public health campaigns and school initiatives also reinforce healthier eating habits. What was once an innocent indulgence now comes with warnings, restrictions, and a strong push toward moderation. Cycling in the 1970s carried an undeniable sense of freedom. Kids would hop on their bikes and ride around town with the wind in their hair, no helmet, pads, or reflective clothing in sight. Protective gear was rarely considered, and safety wasn't a priority. Unfortunately, this often led to accidents with serious head injuries. By the late 1980s and beyond, campaigns raised awareness about cycling safety, and helmets became more common, especially for children. Today, many schools and communities encourage or require protective gear, and parents rarely let their kids ride without it. What once symbolized carefree childhood adventure is now framed around responsibility and prevention. Summers in the 70s often meant kids running around outside with bare shoulders and no thought of sun cream. Sunburn was brushed off as part of childhood, sometimes even joked about as a healthy glow. Parents rarely worried about the long-term effects, and sunscreen was sometimes dismissed as unnecessary or for softies. Today, with strong evidence linking UV exposure to skin cancer, sun protection is considered essential. Parents are encouraged to apply SPF, use hats, and keep children in shaded areas. The shift shows how attitudes toward health have changed. What was once a minor inconvenience is now recognized as a serious risk, requiring daily precautions. Playgrounds in the past were thrilling but risky. Metal slides that heated up in the sun, swings bolted to concrete, and climbing frames without guardrails were standard features. Children regularly left with bruises, grazes, or worse, yet these accidents were accepted as part of growing up. There was little regulation to dictate safety standards. Over time, rising injury statistics led to reforms, including softer surfacing, age-appropriate equipment, and stricter maintenance checks. Modern playgrounds are designed with child safety as the top priority, often sacrificing some of the thrill for reassurance. The comparison highlights how far public attitudes have shifted from toughening kids up to actively preventing injuries. Running into the shop while leaving a child in the back seat was once a normal convenience for busy parents. People assumed it was harmless for a child to wait a few minutes unsupervised. What wasn't widely understood were the dangers, overheating, accidental movement, or even the risk of abduction. High-profile cases and awareness campaigns in the late 20th century began to shift public thinking. Today, leaving a child alone in a car is not only frowned upon, but in many places can cause legal consequences. The casualness of past parenting stands in stark contrast with the vigilance expected of modern families. At family gatherings in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't unusual for kids to be offered a small sip of beer, wine, or sherry, just to try. Parents often believed this was harmless and might even demystify alcohol, teaching moderation early. Cultural attitudes toward drinking were more relaxed, and legal restrictions on underage consumption weren't strictly enforced at home. Today, public health guidelines discourage introducing alcohol to children altogether, emphasizing risks to brain development and long-term health. The modern stance promotes abstinence for young people until adulthood. What once seemed like a light-hearted family ritual is now treated as a serious health concern. For generations, physical punishment was part of everyday parenting. A smack on the hand, a slap on the backside, or even harsher measures were seen as effective ways to keep children in line. Many parents considered it a normal expression of authority, reinforced by schools that also used corporal punishment. Over time, research began to link smacking to emotional harm and behavioural issues, sparking heated debates about discipline. By the 2000s, parts of the UK and many European countries banned physical punishment entirely. Today, alternative approaches like positive reinforcement and timeouts are encouraged instead. What was once an unquestioned parenting tool is now widely condemned as harmful. In the 1970s and 1980s, children were often entrusted with responsibilities that would surprise parents today. It was common for a 9 or 10-year-old to be sent to the corner shop, pick up groceries, or even take the bus into town alone. Parents believed this built independence and resourcefulness, and communities were considered safe enough to allow it. Today, however, many would see this as unsafe due to concerns about traffic, crime, or simply the risks of being unsupervised in public. Social norms have shifted toward constant supervision, with most children escorted almost everywhere. What once symbolized maturity is now more likely to be criticized as neglect. Childhood freedom in past decades often meant disappearing outdoors after breakfast and not returning until dinner. Kids roamed streets, fields and parks, inventing games and exploring without adult eyes on them. Neighbours might keep an informal watch, but direct supervision was rare. Today, traffic dangers, fear of crime, and shifting parental expectations have made such freedom nearly extinct. Structured playdates, after-school clubs, and organised sports now dominate children's time. Critics argue this loss of independence has reduced resilience and creativity, while others see the change as necessary for safety. The contrast between yesterday's carefree adventures and today's protective oversight couldn't be starker. Family car journeys in the 1970s often meant kids bouncing around in the back seat or sitting on a parent's lap. Seatbelts weren't legally required in all cars until the 1980s, and child car seats were either rudimentary or ignored altogether. Parents rarely saw this as risky, assuming careful driving was enough. With road accidents, a leading cause of childhood injury, safety laws eventually tightened. Today, age and size appropriate restraints are mandatory, and parents face fines for failing to use them. It's hard to imagine a time when safety precautions were so relaxed. What once symbolised family road trip fun now looks shockingly careless by modern standards. Perhaps the most striking difference between then and now is smoking. In the 70s and 80s, it was normal for parents to smoke at home, in cars or even in the same room as newborns. Restaurants, airplanes, and hospitals all allowed smoking, so children often grew up surrounded by secondhand smoke without question. Over time, research revealed the severe risks of passive smoking, especially for developing lungs. Public health campaigns and new laws gradually banned indoor smoking in public spaces and discouraged it around children. Today, lighting a cigarette near a child would be socially unacceptable and legally restricted in many contexts. What was once a casual habit is now unthinkable. And that wraps up our trip through forgotten Britain. If you remembered something from your childhood, give this video a like and subscribe for more nostalgia. See you next time.